some of us got here close to the last second. Stephanie, Commissioner Madden is still coming as well, and she will join us in just a minute. We were both in a meeting off-site, and so got a little delayed. So that brings us to Mr. Ivy's opening comments.
Fantastic. Good afternoon, everyone. Mr. Mayor, thank you for that introduction. We got a relatively condensed meeting, I think, for today. This is that special time of year where we look back on the previous fiscal year that ended September 30th and try to recall all the things that we said we were going to do, and then how did we do. We talk a little bit about the finances as well. So this is just kind of a year-end review and a recap. I look forward to any questions or comments you all have. If there's, we do KSI so we can track our performance so we know how we're doing in certain areas. And if there's things that you guys think that we could either do differently or show differently or whatever, we'd certainly welcome the feedback that we might get from that.
Any opening comments by any of the committee before we get started in that regard? Or specific questions to address? By the way, I wanted to point out this is unless the governor allows another executive order on Zoom meetings, Mr. Davis, you may want to point out that this would be our last Zoom, and then also votes on this actually don't count. I believe that's correct. Is that sir?
That's correct. Actually, this committee could participate virtually, can continue to participate virtually. Meetings where formal action is not taken can meet virtually. It's only actually meetings where we're going to take formal action that would need to be in person from this point forward.
So if the committee wants to make a formal action to recommend a capital improvement, how do we handle that vote?
If they're making a recommendation, it's still not a binding formal action, so you could still meet virtually.
Good. So we can use the virtual vote of this to make a decision, and then it would be the commission that makes the formal action that they would do in person. Okay. Thank you, sir. All right.
All right. Very good. Thank you, sir. Ms. Jacoby, would you mind stepping us through the year-end review, please?
Sure can. I'm going to share my screen with y'all. Let's see if this works.
Perfectly, we see it.
Okay. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Fiscal year 2020 has come to a close, and I'd like to review our financial results with you, as well as some operational KSIs, or key success indicators, with you. I do have one word of caution. The numbers I will be showing you are preliminary and still subject to change. At LE, we perform what's called a soft close early in the month so we can issue our monthly financial report in a timely manner. We don't officially close our books for the fiscal year until later, once we receive our pension, mark-to-market, and other outstanding accruals. So please keep this in mind. Now, 2020 was an interesting year, to say the least. As you know, the pandemic had a disastrous effect on our nation's economy, and its impact is reflected in our financials, as you'll see in just a minute. So without much further ado, let's get started. The table on the screen depicts our performance on a cash basis for fiscal year 20 compared to fiscal year 19. If you look at the bottom of the first column, you'll notice that we essentially broke even in fiscal year 20. You'll also notice, if you look to the right, that our cash performance was actually $12.5 million worse than experienced in FY19. Now, I realize the table is extremely busy with a lot of numbers on it, so please bear with me as I walk you through it line item by line item. Let's start with non-fuel operating revenue. I've excluded fuel from the analysis since it's simply a pass-through and doesn't really affect the bottom line. In fiscal year 20, our non-fuel operating revenue totaled $191.3 million, down $500,000 from the previous year. Although the revenue variance is small, there are a lot of factors that affected our operating revenue, and these are depicted on the next slide. As you can see from the waterfall graph, there were positive factors, and these are colored in green, as well as negative factors, and these are in red, that drove the $500,000 variance in revenue between the 2 years. So moving from left to right, you can see from the graph that before the pandemic hit, our weather-adjusted revenue was $400,000 favorable to budget. However, once the pandemic struck and the state went into lockdown mode, we saw a dramatic shift in our load. Our residential sales grew dramatically as schools and colleges shut down and many Floridians started to work from home. Weather-normalized residential sales grew 5% year over year and exceeded our forecast by 15%, accounting for $3.9 million of incremental revenue. Now, while the pandemic had a positive impact on our residential sales, it adversely affected our C&I, or commercial and industrial sales, as businesses closed due to the lockdown. Weather-normalized C&I sales were down 3% year over year, accounting for a $1.2 million drop in revenue. I do want to point out that there is a silver lining. The biggest impact of the pandemic on C&I sales was felt during the lockdown. And since it has been lifted, our commercial and industrial sales have been slowly rebounding. Another pandemic-related driver was the decline in revenue. Another pandemic-related driver, the decline in revenue, was a $900,000 drop in fee income. This is because we waived reconnect and late fees through December 31st of this year as a way to assist our customers during these unsettling times. The final driver of the year-over-year decline in revenue was the non-recurrence of a $2.3 million settlement with Wheelabrator Ridge Energy, coupled with the loss of Wheelabrator's transmission revenue. Let me explain. Wheelabrator is an industry leader in the conversion of municipal solid waste into clean energy. They operated a waste tire processing facility in our service territory, and LE had an agreement to provide the company with transmission services through 2023. Due to Wheelabrator's early termination of the contract, we received a $2.3 million settlement in FY19. We also earned $400,000 in transmission revenue from Wheelabrator that year, and this will not reoccur given the contract's termination. Going forward, we're closely monitoring our load and revenue this year. Many people are still working remotely, so our residential sales appear to be coming in stronger than forecast. Unfortunately, on the C&I side, there are still a number of sectors that have not recovered, such as office, lodging, food service, and assembly. As a result, it's still too early to determine if we will meet our budgeted load forecast this year. Only time will tell. Now let's return to our original table and take a look at our next line item, non-fuel cash operating and maintenance expenses, or O&M for short. Keep in mind we are focused on cash, so I've omitted any non-cash expenses such as depreciation from this line item. In fiscal year 20, our cash O&M expenses were $83.1 million, $1.2 million lower than those incurred in fiscal year 19. So what happened? Well, let's take a look at the next slide for a detailed look at the drivers of that favorable variance. Whoops, I'm going the wrong way. Sorry. Okay, there we go. Depicted on the screen is another waterfall chart highlighting the year-over-year changes in non-fuel cash O&M. Please note that in this case, increases in expenses are shown as red bars because that's bad news. And while decreases are shown in green, because again, lower expenses are good news. So moving from left to right, merits and across the board increases raised our payroll expenses by $1.2 million. However, lower headcount due to our ongoing belt tightening and the city's hiring freeze reduced our expenses by $2 million. And more than offset the impact of the salary increases. Since 2012, we've reduced through attrition our actual headcount by about 100 people. And we did this to decrease our costs, keep our rates low, and proactively prepare for the hard times. We also reduced our controllable costs by $1.7 million in FY20 as we implemented mid-year budget cuts in response to the pandemic-induced recession. Contract labor, training and travel, subscriptions and dues, these were all budget categories that were cut. Partially offsetting the reduction in controllable costs were higher charges from other internal city departments, such as IT, purchasing, janitorial, and fleet. Our internal funds do not make a profit on their services. They simply pass along their costs based on their customers' usage. The increase in these charges totaled approximately $700,000, up about 4% year over year. And lastly, the non-recurrence of mutual aid reimbursements was also an unfavorable variance. And let me explain what I mean by that. In FY19, we were reimbursed for our crew's participation in restoring power in the Florida Panhandle following Hurricane Michael's landfall. This reimbursement was booked as a reduction in expense.
Gina,
in FY20,
could you stop just 1 second, please? Someone is going to give you a quick bottle of water.
Oh, I've got my water here.
Oh, take a drink, please. You're pushing through with your faithfulness, and we know it, and don't question it at all. Is that better?
That's better. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so in fiscal year 19, we were reimbursed for our crew's participation in restoring power in the Florida Panhandle after Hurricane Michael's landfall. This reimbursement was booked as a reduction in expenses in FY19. In fiscal year 20, while our crews helped restore power in Louisiana following Hurricane Laura's landfall, timing was such that we had not yet filed for reimbursement for our assistance by the end of the fiscal year. So in summary, on the O&M side, while we felt the effect of inflation on our costs this year, we were able to offset its impact by implementing strict cost-cutting measures and continuously right-sizing our organization in years past. Let's now move back to our original table depicting our cash performance, and let's look at the next line item, debt service. In fiscal year 20, our debt service was $2.1 million lower than in fiscal year 19. This is because of the way we've designed our debt service payments. Rating agencies like to see a declining debt service trend, so we try to accommodate their preference whenever we establish the amortization schedule for a new bond issue. Next in line are dividends to the city, which came in at $31.5 million, and that's up $600,000 from FY19, and this is due to increased sales volume. If you recall, our dividend is a function of our load, and since it was up in fiscal year 20, our dividends were up as well. Rate-funded capital expenditures also were up in fiscal year 20, as both the delivery and production divisions focused on spending 100% of their budgeted capital budgets. Now, I know $46 million is a lot of money, and you're likely curious about how we spent it. So that's why we'll touch on 2020's capital spending in a little bit more detail in just a minute. I do want to point out, however, that the $46 million is not an unreasonably high amount of capital. As you know, our rule of thumb is to invest an amount at least equal to depreciation, which in fiscal year 20 was slightly over $41 million. Next is investment income, which came in at $6.7 million, and that was $1.1 million below the previous year, and this was due to lower interest rates. On the FEMA reimbursement side, we received $5 million in cash reimbursements from FEMA in fiscal year 20, which we used to replenish our storm fund. On the other hand, in 19, only $1 million had been obligated by FEMA. Currently, one FEMA project, albeit a large one, is still outstanding, and it's making its way through the approval process. We anticipate this amount, which is close to $3 million, will be obligated and received in fiscal year 21. Lastly is our fuel reserve, which is a part of our cash on hand. In fiscal year 20, our fuel reserve decreased about $6 million from $29 million to $23 million, while in fiscal year 19, our reserve increased $4.6 million, and this was despite all our attempts to reduce it. So to summarize, while in fiscal year 19, our cash funding increased $13.1 million, we about broke even in fiscal year 20. While the pandemic and our cost cutting had a favorable impact on our cash this year, We did increase our investment in our aging infrastructure and actively work to decrease our fuel reserve such that it's close to our targeted 20 million. Now let's move on and take a closer look at our capital spending, starting with energy production. In FY20, the production division spent a total of $36.7 million, 11.4 million of which was funded by the issuance of our 2018 bonds. If you recall, we issued bonds 2 years ago to primarily finance construction of our new peaking unit, MGT2, which became commercially available on June 22nd, 2020. At Unit 5, we spent a total of $10.1 million, 7.8 million of which was associated with our long-term maintenance agreement with Siemens. The rest primarily reflects the purchase of equipment needed for the unit's fall hot gas path outage, which began October 3rd. During this outage, we are inspecting and upgrading the combustion turbines and replacing the economizer tube. We will also be installing Siemens' next-gen combustion hardware upgrade, which will improve the unit's power output and efficiency. Another 7.2 million was spent on a major inspection outage at Unit 8. And this outage and the work that we did on Unit 8 will greatly extend the life of that particular unit. During this outage, all major parts were inspected and were either refurbished or replaced. The combustion turbine motor itself had reached the end of its service life and was also replaced. The outage was completed in early 2020, and the 85 megawatt combustion turbine is now available for economic dispatch. Finally, we spent 6.6 million on Unit 3. About 20% of the total, or 1.4 million, was spent on replacing the unit's motor control center and power circuit breakers. If you recall, this was a 3-year project to address Unit 3's overdue electrical equipment. This was a safety issue and a non-discretionary project. We also spent close to 4 million on Unit 3's turbine refurbishment, cooling tower, and scrubber ductwork. Unfortunately, our inspection of the turbine resulted in additional work as the unit experienced a vibration trip and was down during the entire summer due to bearing and precipitator issues. These have since been resolved and the unit is back up and running. Now let's move on to energy deliveries capital spending. In fiscal year 20, Energy Delivery invested 23.8 million into their business. 20.1 million, or 85% of the spend, was rate funded, while the remaining 3.7 million, which was earmarked for the Bridgewater substation, was funded using proceeds from the 2018 bond issue. As you can see from the pie chart, almost half of Delivery's capital funds were spent on new delivery and growth. In fiscal year 20, we worked on 175 new development projects, and this is a big deal. While we averaged about 3.8 million per year on new development between 2015 and 2019, we doubled that spending in fiscal year 20. This growth, however, is a double-edged sword. While the new development should result in increased load growth, the spending did crowd out investment in system hardening, reliability, and maintenance in FY20. Matter of fact, there were a number of large storm hardening transmission projects that had to be deferred, as capital to support growth is not discretionary. Now, you might also be wondering where most of our growth is happening, and it's occurring near the airport off Pipkin Road and in the northeastern section of our service territory. That is why we're building the Bridgewater substation off of State Road 33 and I-4, and have plans to construct another substation near the airport over the next few years. So given all this investment in new development, are we really seeing increased customer growth? You would expect so, right? And the answer is yes. Our customer count grew 1.4% in fiscal year 20. That's up from an average growth rate of 1.1% experienced during the prior 5 years. Other delivery projects worth mentioning include our pole replacement program, where we are swapping out 50-year-old brittle wooden poles with steel poles or new wooden ones, depending upon the system's requirements. We also applied for a $1 million FEMA mitigation grant and have been using it to fund the installation of 25 reclosers and trip savers, which should significantly help improve our reliability. On the lighting side, we've been upgrading our lights to use LED bulbs, which should save the city money in the long run. And lastly, we continue to invest in our technology to make better use of our smart grid and our energy management systems. So now that we've addressed our investment in infrastructure, let's finish off our financial section with a look at our days cash on hand. The following graph depicts our days cash since FY18, and you can easily see our upward trend. And clearly this is positive from a ratings perspective. However, I do want to point out that even though our days cash improved year over year, our actual cash balances were essentially the same at the end of fiscal year 19 and fiscal year 20. The real reason for the increase in our days cash is the decline in our O&M expenses, including fuel. The formula for days cash is shown below the graph, and you can easily see that the lower your O&M, the higher your days cash. And this is exactly what happened in fiscal year 20. Total O&M declined $22 million or 12% between the 2 years, primarily as a result of lower natural gas prices. In fiscal year 19, our average cost of gas was $2.95 per MMBTU, while in fiscal year 20, it averaged $2.07 or 30% less. Were it not for this $22 million decline in expenses, our days cash would have remained steady at around 240 days in fiscal year 20. I also want to remind you that $2 gas is not sustainable in the long run. At that price, many natural gas producers can't break even. Matter of fact, natural gas prices are currently trending back up and are expected to hover around the $3 per MMBTU mark in 2021. As a result, we expect our days cash to decline to 208 this fiscal year. Let's now move on to some key success indicators, as there is more to performance than just the financial. And let's start with a look at our first set of KSIs pertaining to safety. At LE, we are celebrating a really big accomplishment, 0 lost time incidents, or LTIs. This achievement is nothing to sneeze at. Over the last 10 years, we've only achieved this goal once, and that was last fiscal year, FY20. I tried to go back further in time, but unfortunately, I didn't have the data. But I wouldn't be surprised if it's been quite a while since we've come close to achieving this goal. Safety is always a top priority for us. It is vital due to the nature of the work and the hazards our employees face, both in their environment and with regards to the equipment they deal with. That is why we have set some very aggressive internal goals, such as the non-negotiable target of 0 for LTIs. We absolutely don't want anyone hurt on the job. And we achieved 0 LTIs thanks to all the folks in the field, as well as in office settings, who focused on their safety as well as that of others. Our second safety KSI, the OSHA recordable incident rate, was also achieved as we came in better than target. This particular metric tracks the number of OSHA recordable injuries occurring annually among 100 full-time workers. A work-related injury or illness is recordable under OSHA if it requires medical treatment beyond first aid. A recordable may or may not result in a lost time incident. Needless to say, we are very proud of both of these accomplishments and want to thank everyone at LE for their contribution. Achieving these stretch goals is difficult, but in these COVID times, it's even more compelling. Now let's move on to other KSIs, which are more operational in nature, the first one being system reliability. The electric industry measures reliability via several indices, and let me walk you through two of the most important. The first one is the Customer Average Interruption Duration Index, or CAIDI for short, which reflects the average time it takes to restore a customer's power. For the year, we averaged a CAIDI of 56 minutes, 7% better than target, and more importantly, 26% better than last year. Additionally, our CAIDI is within the top quartile based on the latest benchmark data we have. Energy Delivery established a committee last year to address reliability issues, and the division has implemented a number of action plans that have borne fruit. First of all, we changed our distribution feeder recloser relay settings to avoid unnecessary lockouts. The reclosers can resolve common fault conditions caused by animals, lightning, and vegetation without the need to send line workers to the scene. Now, when a fault occurs, we reclose a feeder 3 times rather than twice, and this has helped reduce the frequency of interruptions. We are also installing more reclosing devices in key locations to minimize the number of customers affected when a fault occurs. Additionally, we've dedicated line inspectors to proactively identify potential problems along our worst performing feeders, and we've coordinated efforts between all delivery work groups to address those circuits. So far, these actions are having a positive impact as shown by our System Average Interruption Frequency Index, or SAFE, which is the average number of interruptions that a customer would experience in a year. Now let's switch gears and take a look at the production side of our business. We measure reliability of our generating units by their equivalent availability factor, or EAF. This is the amount of time measured as a percentage that a unit is available to operate at full load. Unfortunately, we missed our target with Unit 3. We set a goal of 80%, and we actually achieved an EAF of 53. As I had mentioned earlier, Unit 3 ran into some startup issues following its spring outage, which resulted in the unit being offline during most of the summer. Thankfully, the issues have been resolved and the unit has been back up and running since mid-September. Although we missed our target with Unit 3, we did beat Unit 5's target. The 91% EAF reflects very strong performance from Unit 5, and we expect that it will run even more efficiently following installation of the hot gas path. Now, moving on to our last set of KSIs, those related to customer satisfaction. As you can see from the table on the slide, our customer satisfaction KSIs were mixed, and this was due to the pandemic. The first metric we'll address is customer satisfaction, which is based on a series of surveys we perform with customers that have transacted business with us. This includes residential and both large and small commercial. In fiscal year 20, we surveyed more than 2,200 customers and achieved an average customer satisfaction rating of 90.3%, less than 1 percentage point below target. But what's more important is our performance was better than last year despite the adverse impact of COVID. On another positive note, our large commercial customer satisfaction came in at 94%, our best year ever. The second metric, call answer time, was definitely affected by the pandemic. During the spring lockdown, we had fewer customer service reps on duty as we wanted to ensure social distancing. And after we ended our moratorium on disconnects, many customers began calling in to set up complex payment arrangements. Lastly, first contact resolution, which reflects the percent of time we resolve a customer's issue the first time, came in at 97%, 1 percentage point better than target. This performance definitely puts us in the first quartile among the 34 major utilities we annually benchmark ourselves against. So to summarize, while we essentially broke even in fiscal year 20 from a cash perspective, we did so because we cut back on our controllable spending and froze hiring. Moreover, we have been proactively reducing our headcount through attrition since 2012, so we could be prepared to weather any hard times we might face. 2021 will be another year of economic uncertainty as the recessionary pressures ripple through the economy. And while we were conservative in our budgeting, it is still too early to tell how we will fare. As a result, we will be monitoring our load carefully and minding our costs. If the economy takes a turn for the worse, we are prepared to cut our expenditures further if need be. On the operational front, we continue to focus on improving our reliability. While we are in the first quartile in CAIDI, the index that measures the average outage duration, we still have some work to do on the frequency side. And that is exactly what Delivery's Reliability Committee is focusing its attention on. We also continue to invest in our generating units to improve the reliability and are closely monitoring Unit 3's performance given its age. And lastly, we continue to serve our customers as they deserve to be served and won't let up on maintaining our first quartile customer service performance. Are there any questions?
And you did it all through the most disruptive COVID period of time we've ever had in our history. So comments from commissioners. Commissioner Walker.
Thank you, Mr. Colby, for that report, and one which I think we can all attune to and understand, the set challenges that we're faced with the COVID-19 situation moving forward as well. But hearing what you said in some of your latter comments and conclusion, I'm sure I would ask these two questions of you. And one is, if we find ourselves going back into a shutdown kind of a situation moving forward, as we move in more into the fiscal year 21, even the calendar year of 21, we will still see some decline in revenue, especially so when it comes to industrial and commercial opportunities. Would you say that's correct?
We'll see the similar trend that we saw early in the spring when the lockdown occurred. We did lose the C&I sales, but we more than made it up on the residential side as people were working from home and kids were home from school. So if we do suffer another lockdown, I don't think it's going to dramatically affect our load, again, because we'll have the higher residential, which will offset the lower commercial.
So we'll see very, very similar trending kind of situation as we had previously. Is that correct?
Yes, if we do have another lockdown.
And maybe you can answer this, or maybe Mr. Ivy. I know, thinking in terms of my years and several, I guess, other committee members who've been here along with myself, we've had, I guess, an FTE very close many years back to almost 600. Now, if I hear you correct, you're saying there's a little bit, maybe more than 400. So we've, of course, lessened our FTE. And how does that affect overall productivity?
We haven't had a problem with productivity. We've, just because of technology, we've been able to absorb all the work that the individuals that were in those positions used to do. So, and a lot of people are finding ways to be more productive. And so that it hasn't been an issue at all.
Well, that's good to hear.
I don't know if you want to, sorry?
Yeah, I would like to.
I don't know if Joel wants to add something to that.
Yeah, I would like to weigh in. We're seeing one of our busiest years. I mean, forget about all the stuff that's been going on that's crazy with 2020. Our customer growth area is just bursting at the seams. You saw the numbers. And granted, we are struggling, trying to keep up. We're having a hard time finding contractors that can come work for us because we're not alone in this boom time. So there's some work that got left undone. But at the same time, I would say our folks are about as productive as they've ever been. And if you think about things that we've done, just the automated metering system that we put in, back in 2013, that alone has led to so many opportunities to reduce the headcount because we can keep up with the work by doing things a lot differently. That's just one shining example of a lot of different things that we've done. So to your point, Commissioner Walker, yes, our folks are very productive, extremely productive. And I can't say enough of good things about how well they're working right now in one of the busiest years that we've had in a good long time.
And I guess that's why I asked that question specifically, because knowing the numbers that FTEs have reduced a great amount, of course, in these last couple of years or so. And when you think of the numbers that have gone down for the number of employees that we have with LE, and then again, as you just mentioned, both you and Mr. Colby, the actual uptick with new residential and somewhat commercial opportunities, making sure that we can perform and get the job done, especially so as well. That's why I asked that kind of question.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Member Johnson.
I'm on now.
There you go.
Yeah, Gina, thank you very much. I think one of the questions was already answered. Our overall load is increasing somewhat. Number of customers we're going up slightly, or are we flat?
Our customer growth was 1.4% in fiscal year 20.
Okay.
Which
Now,
that's consistent with the fact that we're investing a lot in growth. We're seeing, customer growth has been trending up over time.
okay. Question about the $6.6 million spent on Unit 3. Is there a thought process to just begin to write that off, since we know that Unit 3's time with us is probably somewhat limited? So when we capitalize that, we're just postponing the inevitable, pretty much. Do we expect Unit 3 to last 3 to 5 years, or any idea there?
I'll take that, Gina.
Okay.
So at the end of the summer, and I think we had talked about this before, either one-on-ones or at one of the meetings, I forget, but we had roughly $10 million worth of at-risk coal sitting on the ground. So you can kind of get a sense to continue to spend money on Unit 3 in some amount makes a little bit of sense, so that you're not just writing off that much cash that you've already spent. So we're being very mindful of that. I think hopefully you'll be happy to know that we are trying to manage our coal situation to have less than 100,000 tons on the ground at any point in time. So that would be a little bit more than half of what we had prior to. So you can anticipate then that number goes, let's just say that it's linear, and it goes from 10 million down to 5 million of what you might have at risk. Okay, now you start looking a little bit harder at the money that we're looking to spend on Unit 3 going forward. We are watching that very closely. We're looking at other opportunities just in case. But for right now, I want everybody to feel comfortable that we are watching the numbers, and if we need to make a decision on spur of the moment, then I think that we'll be ready to do that. And then that would be what I'm talking about, would be some event that happens to Unit 3 that would be that last thing.
Daryl, are you also addressing the depreciation in that?
The depreciation on
The capital expenditures on the
6 million. Yeah, we've accelerated depreciation on Unit 3, because we know that it's going to be shut down.
Yeah, we are.
Member Johnson.
Yeah, that was part of I knew that we were accelerating. In other words, we're going to take a substantial write down. What about somewhere between 20 and $30 million write down? Is that right? When we shutter that?
It depends on when we shutter it.
Yeah. But yes.
So
It'd be a significant write down, though.
Significant. I have a couple other questions, if you don't mind. First of all, the $10 million drop in the fuel reserve still puts us above 20 million. Is that correct?
yes, we're at 23 million.
Yeah. So hopefully it wouldn't hurt us to bring that down in light of the economic environment we find ourselves in. It wouldn't hurt us to bring that down another 2 to 3 million to get it down right at the 20 million if we could, possibly. But anyway, that's just my. How many employees are related to Unit 3 that if we shut Unit 3 down, that those employees would then have to either be relocated or let go?
That number right now today is between, I'm going to give you too big of a range, but it's between 50 and 75 people that are at risk. That's actual people.
Yeah, that's right. And that's a substantial portion of the people we have on employed right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, significant for sure, especially if you're one of those.
Yeah, it's exactly right. If you're one of those, it's very significant. Another question, if you don't mind. Has there been any thought process? We talked about earlier this whole concept of pole attachments and the revenues that might be available for pole attachments. Have we started looking at how we can, for lack of a better term, turn that lemon into lemonade and try to put some contract concepts together to see if we can generate some revenue off of those pole contracts, pole attachments, and use part of that money to supplement our delivery expenses?
Yeah, so interesting you should say that. Up for second reading under the ordinance today is the fees that are associated with wireless devices that would be connected to our poles. So we've got that straightened out, I think. I'm sorry, what?
Do we have any people ready to go? Do we have any people we can negotiate right now that are ready to be one of our customers?
We have two smaller players that have been waiting in the wings for about a year until we developed this arrangement.
Do we have any idea how much funding potentially that could generate? A range of how much revenues we would get off of that?
I don't right now, Daryl, but it's something we're going to be looking at. And one thing to bear in mind, so AT&T is looking to move into our area, and Verizon is already starting to build some structures. But it's important that we understand they're not necessarily going to contact our poles. They may want to put in their own structures. They may want to put their fiber optic systems underground. So there are alternatives to just connecting straight to our poles. So before I go out and start calculating revenue that may not come to any fruition, it might be wise if we just, let's wait till we get some folks come to us and say, here's what we want to do, here's what our plan is, and then we can come back and suggest what that revenue might look like. That revenue goes back against the earnings that we have generally, and if done well and right, it's just going to decrease the overall cost to everybody else on the system.
That's your limit of 8 questions per session, Daryl. I mean, per round, and we'll go to another question from another committee member. Commissioner McLeod.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Gina and Joel. And just to go back to the Unit 3 discussion, and Joel, I know we've talked about this, but as we talked Friday about approving the change order to the expenditures for the work that was done on Unit 3, what do you think there are scenarios where we would need to move up that target shutdown date? Because it seems like we're kind of just waiting to see if something else happens, but 2024 seems a long ways off with potentially holding a lot of risk. And so I just wonder if there's any change from your perspective on that. When you talk about keeping an eye on it, what are the things that we're watching, as we move into next year?
So we've spent a sufficient amount of money on Unit 3 trying to keep it running, and we spent more than we ever intended to this past year bringing it back up. It made sense under the circumstances. As long as we are, I had to make sure I wasn't muted, as long as we are still managing our coal resource down to a lower level, then all of a sudden the size of the project, let's say that there's a forced outage, we lose a pump of some kind, and it works out to be $2.5 million. If we've got $2.5 million worth of coal sitting on the ground, that starts to looking like a point that you might want to say, that's it, right? And so we're going to be looking at what it takes, not just any one single event, but kind of on an ongoing basis as well. If we're having to just constantly improve things and change things out, we'll probably take a look at the sum total of those and make sure that that's not going to get us to that point. But I'm sitting in the position of we're probably and almost certainly just one event away from having to go into a shutdown mode. And given the age of the generator and kind of its history, I doubt we're going to make it to 2024. Let's put it that way.
And could you remind us what would happen to our in-transit coal commitments at that point in time if we did shut?
So we have an obligation with the coal company. We're supposed to have taken a certain amount of coal this year, and I think we've wound up about 100,000 tons short. We went back to them and talked about things that we could do about that, and they really wanted us to take it or pay for it. And so, but what they did say is they would allow us to roll it over into next year if we couldn't take it all this year. So we're going to try to fully satisfy that arrangement. We have force majeure clauses in our contracts, but those tend to be for short-term issues that we should be trying to get resolution to. So that's not a long-term guarantee that you can get out of anything. But we do have the opportunity to come back before you if we reach a point where we're not going to want to start it again. We could come back before this board and the city commission and ask for a vote to decommission. And at that point, that should kick in clauses in the contract. I'm not going to say that would be without litigation, but certainly that could be something that we could take to help us get to the point where we could minimize the amount of money that's attached to those contracts.
Thank you. That's very helpful. Other questions or comments? Any comments from committee members with respect to the year in total?
And unfortunately, it's not over.
Well, but I mean, with respect to the performance at all.
Yeah.
So there might be some, yes, Commissioner Dr. Childs, Committee Member Childs.
Well, I think given the situation and the context, very favorable results. I know your team, Joel, and your leadership has really done everything that they can to push on ahead, and it's also encouraging to see the data that you guys have provided in terms of new customers and investment in new projects shows that a greater Lakeland regional area is growing economically too. So thank you. Good work.
Thank you.
Committee Member Johnson and then Commissioner McCall.
I wasn't sure whether you were going to allow me to speak again, but anyway, no, I think it's outstanding. I have a list of clients that would kill for the numbers that we have right now. Word of caution that I think that we may see some dragging later on in this next fiscal year, because I think you're going to see some situations in which we thought we were through all the economic turmoil, and we're going to see that business closures and some other shrinking and stuff, we may see some lower numbers. But no, these numbers are, to me, outstanding under the circumstances. Outstanding.
Thank you for those comments. I would like to remind everyone that we did come in with a pandemic-style budget for this year that we're in right now. So we do anticipate that there are still some things yet that could happen. So we're hopeful, of course, just like everybody else, that it won't, and we'll come out better than expected, and that would be good for all of us.
That accolade, though, is kind of like hearing from Simon on America's Got Talent or whatever it is. Commissioner
I was going to echo Mr. Childs and Mr. Johnson's comments about just great work by the team at LE, Joel and Gina. And I think I've seen a lot of nimbleness this year on the customer service side and the communication side, and being able to explain, here's what's going on, here's how we're adapting and adjusting and trying to make things work as best we can to our residents and hardships and situations. And so I know that's not always easy to do. So kudos to your team for that.
Thank you. Thank you. I would like to say that this is just to the efforts of our staff. We've got about 483 employees, actual employees right now, and that's a give or take because we seem to keep going down a lot. But their work and their contributions to the better good this year, in spite of all the obstacles in our path and the things that draw your attention away from what you should be looking at, they've done a very great job. And to top that off with 0 LTIs, I don't know that I've ever experienced that in my tenure anywhere that I've been. That's fantastic. So just can't say enough good things about their efforts this year.
That's incredible. Committee Member McGee, do you have something, sir?
First, I have to apologize. I had some hand surgery, so I got to keep my hand up. Didn't mean to get anybody's attention there, but I want to say this. I want to, with Darrell and Mr. McLeod, that I think the city has done a great job. The presentation by Gina was concise and to the point, and appears good decision making on part of the city. And we had a question. Do you feel this is the most volatile time with Lakeland Electric since you all have been on board? And with Joe and Gina, is that this probably the most volatile time you feel?
You know, I'll go first, Gina, and you can jump in. I don't think so. I mean, what's been volatile has just been the uncertainties because of what's been going on in 2020, right? There's been a lot of anxiety more than anything else. But once we settled in and started seeing what our numbers were looking like, we kind of got back into that, you know, financial comfort zone. But I'm going to tell you, our new customer growth did not slow down as far as I know at all, which really blew me away because I thought that was they were just going to have to shut some of these projects down and walk away from them. That never happened. Never happened. And so that's kind of a testament to how robust I think our local economy is. I'm stoked about it. So in terms of a volatility, yeah, uncertainty, definitely. But our business has been rock solid strong all year long. And that's been a neat thing to see.
Yeah, and I would echo Joel's comments. It's the uncertainty of it.
Thank you.
Not the volatility. That's an issue.
I guess I meant to say the volatility of uncertainty.
Then yes.
There was a lot of pressure during the Florida power contract for the municipal power contract years ago. That during that period of time, I know that was difficult to push through. That's a different kind of pressure. But you've just done a great job in this year.
Our staff has done fantastic.
Any other comments or questions? Thank you very, very much for all your entire team does, and Gina, for your leadership as well. All right, so then we got
Commissioner Reed. Did Commissioner Reed have a question?
Can I go ahead, Bill? Okay.
Yes, sir. I'm sorry. You just.
Thank you. There again, for Darrell's comment there again, and maybe for the rest of our utility committee, it might be interesting for us to briefly go over our poll expenses and something we're addressing today on our second reading. And if just to recap, if I may, and Joel, you may have to correct me on this because I was listening to these numbers the other day. I think currently we get about $1 million a year off our cable, off of our telephone poles right now. I think it's either 9,300 or 93,000. I can't remember how many of poles we have, but and then we're going to adopt some fees today for the wireless component, which will be another fee that we'll start generating off of our poles. Maybe that will give you some benefit.
Right. That number with just Spectrum is like $890,000 a year, I believe, is where that comes in. We got, Gina, help me, wasn't it like $2.5 million in total pole contact revenues or something? So Spectrum represents a pretty fair portion of that. But when we're opening up pole contacts for wireless type connections, it's come one, come all. So we're talking about AT&T, Verizon. Spectrum's going to have a certain amount of that, but they tend to put theirs in mid-span, so I think it's less of an issue for them from them having to pay us for pole contacts, for example. But yeah, we're talking about some of the big players coming in. So potentially we could see a big revenue increase. I think it's cheaper for them to use our facilities and build their own. But what that's going to be exactly, I really don't know. But I'll tell you this, I look forward to the technology. I'm an AT&T customer, and I'm looking forward to being able to utilize that technology.
Any other comments? Is there any other item?
We have some agreements to go through, Mr. Mayor, and then I think we'll be good to go. So I'd turn it over to legal at this point.
Good afternoon, Ramona
Right,
Sirianni from the City Attorney's Office. We just have 3 items to present today on the contract side. The first is an agreement with Roper Pump Company. This is to provide a replacement of the liquid fuel flow divider for our peaking unit MGT2. We also referred to as a Calpine unit previously. During startup of the MGT2, it was discovered that this particular fuel flow divider wasn't working properly. It had excessive corrosion and wear, and due to that, needed replacement. However, due to the long lead time associated with ordering the part, staff was able to contact OUC and get a loaner fuel flow divider to be able to use to put into the unit. So the unit was able to start up on June 22nd, 2020. And after that, staff had looked at the possibility of taking it back out of the unit, refurbishing it, and then sending it to OUC. However, based on the cost, and because the fuel flow divider was working well, we made the decision to leave that alone and then just to go ahead and purchase a new fuel flow divider to replace the one that we took from OUC. We did go through the city's purchasing department, and they determined that this would be a sole source purchase with Roper Pump Company. The total cost of a new fuel flow divider is $55,991. That is included in Lakeland Electric's FY21 budget, and it will take approximately 12 weeks to get that part in. And once we receive it, we will provide that to OUC, and we would ask for your favorable approval.
Is there a motion to approve? I see a motion from Committee Member Johnson, a second from Commissioner McCarley. Discussion on the motion. Seeing none, all those in favor signify by raising your hand. Opposed, same.
The second item that we have is a second amendment to the existing lease agreement that we have with Caterpillar Financial Services for the 992K wheel loader. We have an existing 5-year lease agreement, which is set to expire on November 20th. And based on what has been occurring with Unit 3 and the fact that we may have to decommission earlier, it was a decision made to go ahead and do a month-to-month lease for the wheel loader. It is necessary. This is the only piece of equipment that can move the coal in the coal yard. It's a particularly large piece of equipment. However, upon negotiation with Caterpillar, we were able to do month-to-month lease and keep the monthly lease fee at the same amount, which is $45,182.37. And again, that's consistent with what we are currently paying under the existing lease agreement. The total annual cost of this would be $542,188.44, but we have reserved the right in that this amendment to be able to cancel the agreement upon 15 days prior written notice. So in the event that Unit 3 is decommissioned, we can go ahead and terminate that at that time, and we wouldn't incur any further costs with regard to the equipment. And that is included in Lakeland Electric's FY21 fuel budget, and we'd ask for your favorable approval.
Motion made by Committee Member Johnson, who also has a smile on his face relative to this particular motion. Any reason why, sir? Any comment?
That is exactly what I would have said to do on a piece of equipment like that. Let's go month to month because we don't need to tie ourselves up. The only question I would have regarding that is if there's any market for that piece of equipment in the used market. Probably is in the used market. Now, we do not own that. That's a straight lease. Is that correct?
Correct. We don't own the equipment.
There's a motion. Is there a second to the motion? A second from Commissioner Walker. And discussion by committee members. Any, okay, all those in favor signify by saying aye, by holding up your hand as well. Opposed, same. It unanimously passes.
The last item that we have is a change order with General Electric. This is for bearing failure repair on Unit 3. The main Unit 3's main boiler feed pump turbine low pressure bearing had a catastrophic failure back in May of this year. That failure caused some significant contamination of the oil system and damage to other components of the main steam turbine generator and the boiler feed pump turbine. And due to that, the city, it became an emergency purchase situation, and in accordance with the city's emergency purchasing policy provisions, staff contacted General Electric, which is the original equipment manufacturer, to provide services and immediate repair, which then the city manager did approve that purchase on June 17th, 2020. However, the original estimate of the repairs was $798,147. And once GE came on board and started doing work on this, they discovered there was some more damage with that, and then that resulted in additional work. So the total amount that we are seeking to provide to GE is $2,499,694.74. So that essentially represents a change order of $701,547.74 to GE for this additional work. And that amount is in fact included in Lakeland Electric's FY 2021 budget. And we would ask for your approval.
Is there a motion to approve? I'm going to give that one to Committee Member McGee and a second from, I'm looking, is there a second from Commissioner Franklin? All right, discussion by committee members. Commissioner Franklin. Anything, Commissioner, from beyond the second discussion? No. Okay. Any other discussion by commissioners? All those in favor signify by holding up your hand. Maybe saying aye. Opposed, same. Wow, unanimously passes. Oh, I can see. I'm in a delay mode for some reason because I'm talking 5 seconds in.
It tends to be cutting in and out a little bit. Mr. Mayor, that's all we have for discussion today. We're not going to see you guys again until December, so I would like to wish everyone a happy Thanksgiving.
Thank you very much for your leadership and for the effectiveness of the meeting. Happy Thanksgiving to all. And we look forward to seeing you at our next meeting. Yes, sir, if you haven't already.
I think Bill's hung up.